Welcome to Hauntcore Vault. If you are ready for horror tales, you are in the right place. If you are new, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where are you from and what time you are watching. Let's begin. About 20 years ago, I had to spend Christmas at my grandparents' house. In the early hours of Christmas Eve, around 3 in the morning, something happened that I'll never forget. We were all sleeping upstairs. My dad was lying on the floor of the bedroom when he suddenly woke up and said he heard a loud bang coming from downstairs. He opened the bedroom door, and my granddad was already out on the landing, leaning over the banister. My dad asked him if he heard it too, and my granddad said yes. They both went downstairs to check. Almost immediately, we could hear shouting. Angry shouting. Someone was yelling things like, "Get out of here," and "I'll rip your effing head off." Then there were loud bangs and what sounded like a scuffle. It only lasted a few minutes, but lying there in the dark, it felt like forever. Eventually, my dad and granddad came back upstairs. My mom asked what had happened. My dad started to answer, then noticed me and my siblings sitting upright in bed, wide awake. He stopped himself and said, "It was the Grinch. He got in, but we got the bastard out." I didn't sleep at all after that. I was terrified the Grinch was going to come back and steal the presents. Of course, I know now it wasn't the Grinch, but for years afterward, every Christmas I would ask my parents if we had Grinch traps set up, just in case. I remember one Christmas Eve when I was about 8 or 9 years old. My family and I had just gotten home after visiting relatives, and everyone went to bed. I was lying there, wide awake, anxious and excited for Christmas morning. I've never been a good sleeper. Even as a kid, I struggled to fall asleep, and honestly, I still do. So it wasn't unusual for me to just lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting to get tired or for the sun to come up. At some point during the night, I heard something that instantly snapped me fully awake. There was a loud scraping sound coming from the roof. It sounded like someone was dragging a long, hard object across it, slowly, starting on one side of the house and moving all the way to the other. It wasn't a quick noise or a thump. It was drawn out, deliberate, and heavy. Terrified, I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room. I must have been loud because both of them woke up immediately. I told them what I heard, still shaken. They listened for a moment, but said they hadn't heard anything. They told me it was probably nothing and that I should go back to bed. The next morning, though, we found debris from the roof scattered across the yard. To this day, I have no idea what went across our roof that night. There was never an explanation, and no one else heard it. But I know what I heard, and I've never forgotten it. I was about 16 years old, and it was Christmas Eve. It was snowing heavily outside, the kind of thick, quiet snowfall that makes everything feel unreal. My parents and I were sitting in the living room with only the Christmas tree lights on. We were drinking eggnog and opening our stocking gifts, just like we did every year. Out of nowhere, the door knocker slammed 3 times, loud, aggressive bangs that instantly killed the mood. My dad went to the window, but there was no one there. No movement, nothing. Still, he opened the door and looked down. Lying across the threshold, stretched out on the snow, was a black cat covered in blood. What made it so disturbing was the snow. There were no human footprints, no tire tracks, nothing leading to or away from our door. Logistically, there was no possible way someone could have put that cat there without us seeing or hearing them. The cat was still alive, though barely moving. We shut the door for a moment, not knowing what to do, then brought him inside. My family are huge animal lovers, so leaving him out there wasn't an option. He was young, male, not fixed, and had clearly been in a brutal fight. We cleaned him up, kept him warm, and a few days later took him to the vet. Somehow, he recovered completely.
Eventually, my mom gave the cat to a close friend of ours who lived just down the street. He became part of their family. At first, they gave him a dumb name, like Shadow. About 4 or 5 months later, in the middle of the night, the cat completely lost it. He was howling, screaming, running through the house like something was wrong. They woke everyone up. That's when they discovered an electrical fire had started in their garage. One of the cars was already on fire. Because the cat woke them in time, everyone got out safely. The fire department came before the car could explode, and while the garage was badly damaged, the house and their lives were saved. This was especially lucky because the garage was full of flammable materials. After that, they renamed him Clark, as in Superman. He was an incredibly sweet cat and lived to be pretty old. And to this day, I still think about that snowy Christmas Eve, the unexplained knocking, the lack of footprints, and how that cat somehow showed up exactly where he was needed. Twice.
The news came in. They weren't dead. The monsters weren't gone. They were just getting started. Round 2. After their first attack, the police tried to intervene, but the chaos only grew. The robots, the so-called mutants of human life and man-made mechanics, were taken from their homes and sent to the only other location that existed for the Chubby Bunny Pizza franchise. I thought I had gotten rid of them, left them to rot, but I was wrong. I had to fight until the very end. A few hours later, it was Christmas night. The new and improved gang were singing and caroling. Children and adults laughed and clapped, thinking it was all fun and games. But I could see it. The monsters waiting, watching for the perfect moment to strike and crash the party. I searched the building for what felt like hours, but found nothing. And then the lights went out. People began mumbling, shouting, trying to figure out what had happened. Then I heard it, a child's scream that made my blood run cold. The lights flickered back on, and there it was, Chubby Bunny, in Christmas clothes, holding a little girl too tightly. Panic swept the room as the crowd realized the horror unfolding. Staff tried to calm everyone, but it was hopeless. This wasn't a joyful holiday anymore. This was a nightmare powered by advanced AI. Then the other creatures came to life. Cuckoo the Clown, Carmen Cat, and Theodore Bear. "Where y'all going?" giggled Cuckoo, the maniacal metal clown. "The Christmas party's just getting started," cackled Parman, the black cat in a festive cloak. Theodore, the giant Frankenstein's teddy bear, chimed in, "Come on, give me a big ol' hug." The demons broke free of the restraints that had held them to the stage and began roaming the room. Chubby Bunny didn't move. It just stood there, holding its victim, watching the terrified crowd scatter. I could feel my heart pounding as the number of survivors dropped. Everyone around me was disappearing one by one, until finally, it was just me. They stared at me, studying me for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, they backed away and returned to their positions on the stage, leaving me alive and unharmed. Even Chubby Bunny dropped its hold. I ran out the door as fast as I could, and somehow it was unlocked. I didn't look back. I promised myself I'd never go back there, not even if all of nature itself commanded me to. That Christmas, the monsters of the pizza place had won, but I survived.
On Christmas Day in 1996, a woman named Patty Vaughan disappeared, and her case has stayed with me ever since because of how unsettling and unresolved it is. Patty was 32 years old and lived in Lavernia, Texas. That Christmas Day, she left her home and never came back. The following day, her van was found about 15 miles away. One of the tires was flat, and inside the vehicle, investigators found traces of blood along with a red workman's jumpsuit. The last confirmed sighting of Patty was just before her disappearance, after an argument with her estranged husband, J.R. They had 3 children together, but had separated 2 months earlier. JR was reportedly jealous because Patty had started dating another man, and it raised suspicion when he filed for divorce the day after she vanished. As the investigation continued, more troubling details emerged. Blood was found in Patty's bedroom and on a mop inside her home, suggesting someone had tried to clean up. The carpet inside her van appeared to have been recently shampooed. DNA testing later confirmed that all of the blood found belonged to Patty. 2 months after Patty went missing, the case took a bizarre turn when her mother burst into JR's home and attacked him with a baseball bat. Despite this, authorities were never able to find enough evidence to charge him. JR eventually took custody of the children and left the state. Another disturbing possibility surfaced during the investigation. At the time Patty disappeared, JR had been working construction on a school in the nearby town of Natalia. Investigators have not ruled out the theory that Patty's remains could be encased within the school's concrete foundation, possibly with more than one person involved in the disposal. Years later, DNA testing was performed on additional items found in Patty's van. The DNA was confirmed to be female, but it did not belong to Patty Vaughan. That discovery only deepened the mystery. To this day, Patty Vaughan's disappearance remains unsolved, and the unanswered questions surrounding what happened to her on Christmas Day continue to haunt everyone who learns about the case.
One of the most disturbing examples of Christmas-time violence I've ever learned about involves a man named Ronald Simmons. Over the Christmas period, Simmons murdered 16 people, including 14 members of his own family. The crimes unfolded over several days. During that time, he remained in his home, drinking while the bodies of his family were still there, with others hidden outside on the property. The background of the case is deeply disturbing. Investigators later uncovered long-term abuse within the household, including crimes against his own children. The situation escalated when one of his daughters reported him to authorities, which many believe triggered what followed. But the violence didn't end with his family. Afterward, Simmons left his home and went on a spree, killing and injuring additional people in different locations. These victims were co-workers and acquaintances, people he believed had wronged him or rejected him in some way. The case shocked the nation, not just because of the number of victims, but because of the timing. It happened during a period that's usually associated with family, celebration, and peace. Sadly, Simmons is not an isolated example. There is a long and unsettling history of large family murders occurring during or around Christmas. For reasons still debated by psychologists and criminologists, the pressures of the holiday season have repeatedly coincided with some of the most extreme acts of familicide on record. These cases stand as grim reminders that the holidays are not safe or joyful for everyone, and that beneath the surface of tradition, there are sometimes stories too dark to forget. This is one of the most disturbing Christmas stories I've ever learned about, and it took place in 1929. Shortly before Christmas, a man named Charlie Lawson took his wife and their 7 children into town. He bought them all new clothes and even had a formal family portrait taken. For a working-class rural family at that time, this was extremely unusual, and many people later believed it was a sign that something had already been planned. On the afternoon of Christmas Day, tragedy struck. Charlie waited near the family's tobacco barn as 2 of his daughters were leaving to visit relatives. They never made it there. After that, he returned to the house where the rest of his family was. What followed was the loss of his wife and all of the children who were still there, including the youngest, who was only a few months old. After everything was over, Charlie left the house and went into the nearby woods. Hours later, his life also ended there. The only survivor was his eldest son, Arthur, who was 16 years old. Charlie had sent him on an errand just before the events began, and that decision spared his life. When neighbors arrived and authorities began to investigate, they found the family members carefully positioned, their arms crossed, with stones placed beneath their heads. Many people had already gathered at the property by the time a final sound from the woods confirmed what had happened. A police officer who was with Arthur followed the sound and discovered Charlie near a tree, along with letters addressed to his parents. Footprints circling the tree suggested he had been there for some time beforehand. Nearly a century later, the reason behind Charlie Lawson's actions remains unknown. The case stands as one of the darkest and most unsettling tragedies ever tied to Christmas, leaving behind questions that were never answered.
When I was a kid, my grandparents lived in an old farmhouse from the early 1800s. The land it sat on had originally been part of a much larger property that was later divided up into what eventually became half the town. At some point, the original family built a second house right next door for their mother-in-law. That newer house still dated back to the late 1800s. One of the bedrooms in my grandparents' house was used as a playroom when I was little. In the windows of that room, facing the neighboring house, there were statues of Jesus and Mary. They were always there, always in the windows, and I was never allowed to touch them or move them, ever. My aunts and uncles would sometimes make weird comments about something they called the Betty Crocker lady. But whenever I asked what they meant, no one would explain it to me. Years later, I finally found out why. Before I was born, one Christmas when my mom and uncles were still kids, my great-aunt stayed with my grandparents. She slept in that bedroom, the same one that later became our playroom. The next morning, she came downstairs visibly shaken. She told everyone that during the night she woke up and saw a woman standing in the room watching her sleep. She said the woman looked exactly like Betty Crocker. Later that day, the family went next door to the neighboring house for a Christmas cocktail. While they were there, my great-aunt suddenly froze and pointed to an old portrait hanging above the fireplace. She asked who the woman in the painting was. The neighbors said they didn't really know. The portrait had been left behind by the previous family, and they kept it because they thought it looked interesting. That portrait was the woman my great-aunt had seen. It turned out she was the mother-in-law the neighboring house had originally been built for more than 130 years earlier. After that, my very Irish Catholic grandmother went straight home and placed statues of Jesus and Mary in every window facing that house. Specifically so, in her words, she couldn't get into our house. And that's why, years later, those statues were still there, untouched, silently watching the house next door.